Hi, everybody, and welcome to Exegetically Speaking, a podcast of the friends and faculty of Wheaton College, Wheaton, Illinois, and the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, Texas. My name is David Capes, and I am the Senior Research Fellow at the Lanier Library. Our purpose in these podcasts is pretty simple. We want to promote the study of biblical languages, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, so we can read the Bible more faithfully, study it more fully, and not just read it and study it, but also to live it. Joining me today is Dr. Michael Graves, the Armerding Professor of Biblical Studies at Wheaton College. Dr. Graves, Michael, good to see you.
Good to see you too, David. Nice to see you in your work here down at Lanier Library.
Yeah, and I hope we can get you to come down and work with us at some time and, come for a study visit, come for a research visit or something at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like a wonderful place. Obviously, the weather is beautiful and Houston is beautiful, but it sounds like the library's also got a lot of wonderful resources to use. So count on getting an application from me at some point.
All right, good. And you know me, so that'll probably get you a little bit ahead of the game at that point.
I'm praying so, yeah.
It's good to see you, though. Let's talk a bit about Psalm 1 today on Exegetically Speaking. And it's one of my favorite psalms. Some believe it to be sort of a psalm that sort of sets the tone for the whole Psalter.
Absolutely, yeah. So it is. It's one of my favorite psalms, and I feel like every line of this psalm you could use as a way to introduce kind of how Hebrew poetry works. Mm-hmm. Everything from the beautiful parallelism at the first verse, who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked or stand, in the path of sinners or sit in the seat of scoffers. Right. It's kind of that slow movement towards being in sin, to the beautiful poetic imagery, the metaphor of the tree that's soaking up Torah and planted by a stream of water. Right. So it's like every verse is like a paradigm for one beautiful thing that Hebrew poetry can do. And the thing I thought we'd talk about today actually is one that really intersects with the Hebrew language quite nicely.
Well, good. Well, now we're going to be down in verse 2 for this, Psalm 1, yes. 2.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So verse 2, one of the things we read about when we're reading a poem is I mentioned in Hebrew poetry doesn't have rhyme per se, but it has parallelism. So we saw that in verse 1. You see the metaphor, the imagery of the tree, in verse 3. You see some other poetic images later. One thing that we see in poetry are allusions to earlier traditions. If you took an English class and you were reading a poem, the poet may just allude to a character, from the Odyssey, or they may allude to a famous character from, a play or something like that. And you simply pick up that allusion and it contributes beautifully to the feeling of the poem and to what it communicates. So what I want to suggest is that we actually have an allusion, a poetic allusion to a story in the Bible in verse 2 of Psalm 1 that contributes to its meaning and actually is, I think, quite neat for teaching or preaching the psalm as well.
Well, that passage reads something like, his delight or their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law they meditate day and night. That's the translation.
So verse 1, introduces the idea of the sinner should not do these things.
Right.
So then what should the person do who is walking with the Lord? And so a ki'im, however, b'torat Adonai cheftso, in the Torah, in the law of the Lord is his delight. V'torato, and in his law, in his Torah, yehege yomam valayla, yom and laila, day and night. He meditates on it day and night. So he delights in the Lord, his law. He meditates on the Torah day and night. And then that verse 3, after the metaphor of the tree, it says that v'chol asher ya'aseh yatzliach. And the word, what that means is, and everything which he does, yatzliach, he prospers. Everything he does prospers. And so when you're looking at that language, if you were, studying this text in Hebrew, you would look up the word hagah, and you'd say, to murmur, to mumble. It's kind of a funny word. But then you'd find one or two passages where it actually means to meditate on something. The idea being that, like if you're reading over it and you're vocalizing it out loud, murmuring, mumbling over it, you're like meditating on it. So if you look up the word,
Like a
you'd
mantra,
say, oh,
almost
like a mantra.
you
Absolutely.
take it over and over again. Yeah.
Over and over. So if you look up that word in your dictionary, you'll see the other place that it's used that way is in Joshua chapter 1. So you would look over in your Bible at Joshua chapter 1,
Which is what I'm going to do right now.
which you can turn to it right there. And if you are a Hebrew student, you could take your paper Hebrew Bible, or you could take your computer, your Accordance or BibleWorks or whatever else that you're using.
Right.
And you look up Joshua 1:8, and you would say, oh yeah, it does use this word haga to mean to meditate on the law of the Lord. And then you would also realize that in Joshua 1:8, this is the famous passage that many people have written on their wall, that do not let this Sefer HaTorah, this book of the Torah, depart from your mouth, the Hagita, but you shall meditate on it, Yomam Valayla.
Exactly what you see in Psalm 1, 2.
So you're meditating on the Torah. Ooh, that was my first connection, because that's an unusual Hebrew word, and that drew me over to Joshua 1:8. My dictionary told me that. Then when I looked at it, I saw the word Yomam Valayla. I'm meditating on it day and night. And then as I keep reading throughout the verse, look at how the verse ends. Be careful to do according to everything written in it, because then tatzliach et derachecha, you will prosper your way. That's the same word in Hebrew that's at the end of verse 3 in the Psalm, right after the metaphor of the tree. So again, the connection of the word to meditate together with these other linguistic connections, and the fact that they're so distinctive in the Bible, makes me think that a reader of Psalm 1 is meant to have Joshua 1 in their mind. And many people know the great story of Joshua and the things that God did with them when they obeyed the Torah. And it's like one of them is sort of an illustration of the other.
And of course, when they didn't obey, there were difficulties and disadvantages on every turn.
Absolutely. And I think one thing about Joshua that's so important is that Joshua is not a book about these manly, powerful people who just took over Canaan by being, super macho. But the preparations they make is that they circumcise, they celebrate the Passover, they set up memorial stones, they dedicate themselves to God. And when they observe the Torah, like with Jericho, the walls just fall down. Whereas after that, when they fight the city of Ai, because there was sin in the community, no matter what they did, they couldn't succeed.
Yeah, that's right.
So to me, it adds to the beauty of Psalm 1. And if I were preaching or teaching on Psalm 1, I might tell a story about my family or about my dog, or, tell them. It's great to tell fun stories, when you're teaching and preaching.
Right.
But boy, if the biblical text actually alludes to a story elsewhere in the Bible,
that's
one
where
story
you go.
It's just tell them the story of Joshua.
That's where you go.
And that will help to unpack the meaning of Psalm 1.
It's almost as if, Psalm 1, I don't know which came first, Psalm 1 or Joshua 1. It's hard to say. But at least for the reader of Psalm 1, it just takes you right back. And that's a beautiful way for us to read those texts together, one enlightening the other.
Good, excellent. Yeah. Well, I hope so. And I hope that you can also see that the Hebrew really helps with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Michael, thank you so much for being with us here today on Exegetically Speaking.
Great. Thanks. Blessings to you. Take care.
Thanks to Silvio Vasquez, Rebecca Larson, and Krista Sanchez for helping us edit and produce the podcast. Thanks as well to Phil Keggy for our music. If you want to study biblical languages, you really need to consider Wheaton College, whether you're a graduate or undergraduate student. Go to the website, www.wheaton.edu, and look for modern and classical languages if you're an undergrad student. But if you're a grad student, look for the Master of Arts in Biblical Exegesis. Get started today. If you have questions or comments about this podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell, whoever you want to about what we're doing. Contact us at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for listening.